Listen, I'm delighted to be here with you and to be the first keynote speaker at this very important conference. And the topic that was given to me is one that I'm delighted to speak on, which is the image of God, the Imago Dei, which is the source of our joy. Here's the one idea now I want you to get from my talk. So right off the bat, let me just tell you what it is. That the Imago Dei is not some little special privilege that we hang on to for our own spiritual benefit. Rather, as in the great parable of the talents, the image of God is for the world. We must think of ourselves as representatives of God, bringing His power, His wisdom, His heart, His mind to the world. Image of God is a mission and a responsibility. So that's the main point of my talk. Just keep that in mind. There is no religion, there is no philosophy, there is no social theory in the history of mankind that holds up human beings more than Christianity does. There is no greater humanism than Christianity. Whether it's ancient philosophies of human perfectibility, whether it's Renaissance humanism, whether it's modern philosophies, whether it's a contemporary philosophy of self-actuation, there is no philosophy, religion, or social theory that holds up the human being higher than Christianity does. It's true. The claim of the Bible is that we have been made in the image and likeness of God, that we have been imbued with a divine mission, that we are destined for life on high with God. No one says more about the human being than Christianity. There's a wonderful adage from the church fathers. They all repeat it. Deus fit homo, ut homo fieret Deus. It means God became man, that man might become God. Now don't misconstrue it as turning into God. What they meant was God became one of us that we might be sharers in the very divine nature. That's what Christianity is about. That's Imago Dei. You know, the new atheists made their great splash a few years ago, and all they were doing was in a crude form reviving the old atheism. And see, atheism, old and new, is predicated upon the opposite assumption, namely that somehow God is competitive to human flourishing. That God and human beings are at odds with each other. The more glory we give to God, the less glory we get. Read Feuerbach, Marx, Freud, Sartre, the rest of them, and then read Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. The same old tired argument that God is a competitor to human flourishing. Well, listen, everybody, that is inimical to the Bible. The great biblical image is the burning bush. Remember the bush that Moses sees that's on fire but not consumed. When the true God comes close to His creation, He sets it on fire and He makes it radiant and beautiful, and He does not consume it. That's the sign. Look at the saints now. That's the sign that God has come close, that we become luminous and radiant and beautiful. We are not consumed, but we are enhanced. That's why St. Irenaeus, in one of the best summary statements of Christianity, can say, Gloria Dei, homo vivens. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's Christianity. That's Imago Dei. And listen, especially young people, don't let the atheists, old or new, teach you otherwise. Don't let the professors of atheism teach you otherwise. That's inauthentic Christianity. They're battling against a straw man. The real thing is a deep, deep humanism. Okay. As the clock is ticking down, there's a great clock right in front of me here, which is telling me exactly what I should stop, which is actually good for you. Listen, let's go back to the very beginning, to the opening chapters of the book of Genesis, to see what this thing looks like. Notice first, when God creates the heavens and the earth, it's not like the ancient myths. In almost all the ancient myths of creation, creation happens through some primordial act of violence. One god wrestles another into submission. One set of gods defeats another. There's none of that in Christianity. but rather through a sheerly nonviolent act of speech, God gives rise to the world. Let there be light, and there was light. Let the earth come forth, and it came forth. God does not wrestle anything into submission when he makes the world. God does not have to put something down, but rather through a sheer act of love, he gives rise to the world. So it always goes with God. Notice, too, how beautifully liturgical the account of creation is. As all the elements come forth from God, one after the other, like a liturgical procession. Sun, moon, planet, stars, earth, animals, insects. Notice, please, everybody, at one time or another in the ancient world, all those things were worshipped. Sun, moon, stars, the earth itself, the sea, they were all objects of worship. You see what the author of Genesis is saying? No, they're not to be worshipped. Rather, they themselves are in a beautiful liturgical procession because they are meant to give praise to God. How do they do it? Well, who's the last person, the last element in this great liturgical procession? But human beings. Just as the priest, now I can say, or bishop, comes last, the most important figure comes at the end, so in Genesis, humanity comes at the end of this great liturgical procession. Why? Why? Because our deepest task is to lead all of creation in a great chorus of praise. Through our human voices, the whole cosmos finds its voice giving praise to God. See, and that's why the church fathers saw Adam before the fall as the first priest. It's a beautiful idea. The first priest, his job was to praise. Pope Benedict taught us that the word adoration comes from the Latin ad oratio, right? Ad ora means mouth to mouth. The one who adores is aligned to God, mouth to mouth. We hear in the Song of Songs, let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth. See, that's the stance of adoratio, mouth to mouth. Adam, the first priest, is the one through whom the whole universe gives praise to God. Secondly, we hear in the second account of creation that as God stands next to Adam, all the animals come forward and Adam names them. What he's literally doing is cataloging them. Katalogon in Greek means according to the word. With God next to him, he names the animals according to their intelligibility. The church fathers saw this as Adam's role, humanity's role, as scientist, as philosopher, as truth teller. Not making up the truth that we want, but cataloging the world, naming it according to the intelligibility God has placed in it. Adam is priest. He's also prophet, truth teller. Finally, he's king. What's Adam's job in the garden? To tend it, to maintain it in its integrity and beauty. But then, and the rabbis are very good at this, he was meant then to go on mission and to Edenize the world, to turn the whole world into a place where God is being rightly praised. That's the kingly task of Adam, to go on the march. We speak of an ecclesia militans, don't we? A church militant, a church on the march, Edenizing the world, bringing God's good order to the universe. Now, let me suggest to you, this is a more textured version of what the Bible means by image of God. We're made in the image of God. It means we've got a mission. To praise God aright, to speak the truth of things according to God's logos, and then to bring God's good order to the whole world. That's the Imago Dei. That's the image, precisely as mission. Now, What goes wrong with us, according to the Bible? That imago gets compromised. Instead of worshiping God, we worship all kinds of other things. Wealth and pleasure, power, honor, our own egos. Paul Tillich, the Protestant theologian, said, "The only thing I need to ask to understand everything about you is, what do you worship?" That's a really interesting insight. What do you give highest value to? That'll tell me everything else I need to know about you. Do you see how a compromise of the Imago Dei is I start to worship things other than God? Oh, friends, read the Old Testament now with that rubric in mind. What always goes wrong with Israel, I mean always, without exception, is bad praise, running after false gods, compromising their identity as a priestly people. We're the new Israel, by the way. The same rubric now applies to us. Secondly, what goes bad? We lose our prophetic identity. We stop cataloging the world, katalogon, according to God's intelligibility, and we start making things up on our own. We start projecting truths outward according to our own desires and whims. I'll come back to this. And finally, we stop being good kings. We privatize our religion. Sound familiar? It's the modern etiquette. Keep it to yourself. You know, it's your little private concern, but don't start marching around the world with your religion. And so, like King David at the beginning of the Bathsheba incident, where it says that time of year when kings go on campaign, David stayed home. And see the trouble he got into. Watch it when we kings stop going on campaign and start privatizing our religion. Okay? Now, with that in mind, I want to go back to these three categories and look at our situation today. First of all, priesthood. You know, a really good term here to keep in mind is the term orthodoxy. Now, I know we tend to think right away that means right belief, and that's certainly a derivative sense of it, right belief. But you know, doxa in Greek means praise. So orthodoxy is right praise. That's always the solution, and the suspension of orthodoxy is always the problem. Take that to the bank spiritually. It's a basic biblical principle. If things are going wrong, then the wrong things are being praised. To get it right, recover right praise. That's the insight. You know that great story in the first book of Kings, Elijah and the priests of Baal? It's so illuminating for our present situation. First of all, how many representatives of Yahweh are there? Well, there's precisely one. Priests and prophets tend to be thin on the ground. How many priests of Baal are there in that story? 450. The priests and avatars and prophets of false gods, everybody, are always thick on the ground. Always were, always will be. But Elijah challenges them. Build altars to your gods, I'll build altar to Yahweh, and then we'll see who answers, remember? And the priests of Baal erect their altars, and they beg, and they pray, and they cajole. Nothing happens. They hop around the altars. Nothing happens. They reach the point where they even slash themselves, remember? Until they're bleeding, and nothing happens. Remember how deliciously Elijah mocks them in the story? Well, they're gods after all. Maybe they're on vacation, he says. Maybe they're napping. There's even a suggestion, my friends who know Hebrew better than I do say, maybe they're in the bathroom. I don't know where these gods of yours are, but they're not answering. Then, of course, Elijah calls upon Yahweh. The fire comes down, consumes the sacrifice. He wins the battle. But here's the point. It's not just a story of my God's bigger than your God. It's making this point. Think of the altars erected to the Baals, to the false gods. Are all the forms of false worship that we engage in. I base my life on seeking wealth. In fact, I hop around that altar my whole life long, begging, cajoling, yes, even wounding myself in the process. Should sound familiar, fellow sinners, right? I'm trying to satisfy the deepest longing of my heart with wealth. It can't work. It won't work. It's not destined to work. And so I spend my whole life in false worship. Or pleasure. Pleasure will satisfy the deepest longing of my heart. It can't. It can't. So I hop around the altar. I beg, I cajole, I wound myself in the process. Anyone addicted to sex or to pornography or alcohol or drugs knows about this. Power, maybe power is my God. I spend my whole life hopping around the altar of power. It's not meant to satisfy the longing of the heart. It can't. It can't. And so I wound myself in the process. Elijah erects the altar to the true God. It's only God who can satisfy the deepest longing of the heart. Lord, you made us for yourself. Therefore, our heart is restless till it rests in thee. St. Augustine's magnificent summary of the Christian life. We need to teach our culture how to worship aright, everybody. If we keep our worship to ourselves, we are not fulfilling our mission. We live in a society increasingly secularist, and we all know, and we see the stats for it all the time. You can see it in the wounded hearts of so many young people who are told over and over again in every song, every movie, every star tells them that you can find happiness in wealth and power and pleasure and honor. It's doing damage to them, isn't it? We know it. It's doing damage to them. False worship is not a parlor game. False worship is what rends the heart. What's our job as bearers of the Imago Dei? To teach the world again how to praise. How to praise. How to praise. Do you know the great Gloria prayer? Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to people of good will. Do you see, everybody, how that's a kind of formula? Give glory to God in the highest. Worship Him alone. What's going to happen then? Peace will tend to break out among us. Concomitantly, worship something other than the true God. What will happen? War will break out among us. Harmony will turn into cacophony. What do you worship? What do you worship? Worship of the true God leads to peace and to harmony, both in here and around. False worship leads to deep pain. We, the bearers of the Imago Dei, must teach the world how to worship aright. Do you know that wonderful scene? I saw that over in the exhibit center. They had the little cutouts of Francis and Benedict and John Paul. I was put in mind of John Paul's magnificent witness in the June of 1979. Remember, with the 1 million people there in Victory Square and the whole communist government behind him. And John Paul begins to speak of human dignity, of worship, of God, of salvation. And the people begin to chant spontaneously, "We want God. We want God." And John Paul went on, but they drowned him out. "We want God. We want God." And people on the scene say it went on for 15 minutes. "We want God. We want God." And the communist government behind John Paul was sitting shamefaced. All I can think of was Elijah and the priests of Baal. I mean, here is a government that was systematically involved in the suppression of right praise. And it broke the heart of a whole nation. And that moment, John Paul, like a great priest, called forth praise. We want God. We want God. That's our public role. That's our public responsibility as priests, bearers of the divine Imago. Adam, before the fall, was also a prophet. Cataloging, naming things according to the Logos, according to the divine intelligibility that God had placed in them. What's the problem today, everybody? And we know it. We know it. That instead of cataloging things, naming them according to God's intelligibility, we name things according to our whim and our desire. We project our own subjective fantasies onto the world and say that's the way things are. See, in that, we undermine our prophetic identity and prophetic mission. Many have seen this as a type of Gnosticism, and indeed it is. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean this view that somehow the body is infinitely malleable. It's just something that we can shape according to our whim and desire. See it in so many of the debates going on today. I can make my body or the body what I want it to be. But that's inimical to the Bible, which sees the body as imbued with its own intrinsic intelligibility given by God. It's the respect of the body and its own intrinsic reasonableness that gives rise to right speech. But think of our system today is so dominated by a willfulness vis-a-vis reality. Think of Friedrich Nietzsche, I think the most influential of the 19th century philosophers. Nietzsche's will to power. My will determines what things are. Don't tell me what to think, what to believe. I will my own truth. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism, which was once sort of a high-level intellectual preoccupation, but man, did that trickle down into the culture, so that I think most teenagers today have basically Sartre's view of life, which is that existence precedes essence. That means my freedom comes first. And then on the basis of that freedom, I determine what things are. I'll name who I am. I'll name what my life is about. You think all that's a philosophical abstraction? Well, look at Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Remember the U.S. Supreme Court in 1992? Where our Supreme Court said it belongs to the very nature of liberty to determine the meaning of my life, of existence, and of the universe. I'm not making it up. That's the language of the Supreme Court. It belongs to my freedom to determine the meaning of the universe. Oh, that's all, huh? I can just the universe. See, but that's inimical to the Bible. That's the opposite of cataloging. That's an imposition of my own subjective whim on reality. You know what this is very closely related to, everybody? And I think one of the great insights in the last 25 or 30 years by the great Dominican moral theologian, Serve Pinckaers, wrote a wonderful book called The Sources of Christian Ethics. In that book, he makes a distinction between two types of freedom. The freedom of indifference and the freedom for excellence. And so much hinges upon this. What's the freedom of indifference? It's the view of freedom that characterizes much of the modern world. It means freedom hovers above the yes and the no. And on the basis of no compulsion, exterior or interior, it decides. I'm free in the measure that I can decide who I will be and what I will do. On that reading of freedom, law is always a problem. Law is an imposition. At best, it's something I accept as a sort of necessary evil, like traffic laws. You know, I mean, deep down, I like to drive any way I want. I mean, wouldn't you? But I got these pesky traffic laws. I like to drive 100 miles an hour, but I got to drive 55. I'd like to go right through that intersection, but I got that pesky red light. See, that's the law as an affront to freedom as self-determination. But, this other type of freedom, the freedom for excellence, that's what we find in the Bible and in the great Catholic tradition. What's freedom for excellence? It's the shaping of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. It's the shaping of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. Now, let me tell you what I mean. I stand before you today as a relatively free speaker of English, right? I can say pretty much whatever I want to say in English. Now, is that because I just decided early on I would talk any way I wanted to? Well, no. I mean, from the time I was a little kid, I took in all sorts of laws and rules and syntax and grammar and vocabulary. I was corrected by all sorts of people. I read great masters of the English language. And through this long process of disciplining of my desire, I became free now to speak the English language. Any golfers here? There must be a few golfers here. I'm the typical American. I mean, I like to play golf. I'm basically terrible at it. But what's the very worst thing you could do if you want to teach a kid how to golf? Here's an 8-iron. Now just swing any way you want, right? How's that going to work? Just, be yourself. Just express yourself. Swing any way you want. Your laughter tells the story. I played golf for many years before I had any proper training. I picked up a club this friend of mine gave me, and I was horsing around playing horrific golf. And then I gave it up because I was so bad at it. I was so frustrated I gave it up. And then when I was about, 45 or so, this very nice man who was a golf pro heard me at a talk, and he said, "Father, it's great. Can I help you with anything? Can I do anything for you?" I said, "Yeah, you can teach me how to play golf." So he took me out to the driving range one day. He said, "Well, Father, just take the 5-iron there and just swing." And so I did, and his face said, where do I begin? And so he then put me through, I'll never forget it, a whole set of exercises. I remember he put 3 golf balls under my right foot to stabilize it. He said, you do what a lot of bad golfers do. You kind of sway off the ball, and then you get all messed up. So he stabilized my right foot. And then he said, okay, now I want you to turn your shoulders and pretend you're a waiter and you're holding glasses. So turn and give them to me. So I did. He goes, no, further. I don't have them yet. Further. No, I have them yet. Further. All right, there. That's where I want you to turn. I said, well, I'm dying. And he goes, I know, but that's the right position. So with those 2 little moves, boom, I suddenly stabilized my leg, did a full shoulder turn, and then started to hit the ball pretty well. Boom, I'm hitting this 5-iron. Not like, Rory McIlroy, but a lot better than I was doing. He's a good teacher. He said, okay, that's enough for today. I'll never forget. I spontaneously said, no, give me more. And see, what was happening was he was giving me laws that were disciplining my mind and my body so that I could accomplish something I always wanted to accomplish. I wanted more laws, not less. Does that make sense? And the minute I said that to him, what came to my mind was the psalm. Lord, how I love your law, how I meditate upon it day and night. Can you see how on that first reading of freedom, that doesn't make a lick of sense? Again, if freedom just means self-determination, the law is at best a necessary evil. But nobody is like meditating day and night on the traffic code, are they? Or the tax code. No, I mean, the law is something we accept as a necessary evil. But actually, I have it on this trip with me. I brought my Golf Digest magazine. Golfers know about that. and it's got stories about golfers, but at the heart of Golf Digest are always a set of diagrams showing you how to hit the golf ball, about shoulder turn and elbow position and legs and this and that. And so there I lie in bed at night meditating on the laws of golf. But you see how on that second view of freedom, that makes perfect sense. Because the law there is not the enemy of freedom. The law is the condition for the possibility of freedom. See, what I'm seeking is freedom to play the game, to do whatever I have to do, whether it's putting or it's iron shooting or it's tee shots. I want to be free. And the law is going to set me free. I think, friends, one of the biggest problems we face is, as a Catholic Church, we speak of the law. We speak of the moral law. We speak of the theology of the body, etc. And how is it read? It's read through the lens of that first type of freedom. And that's why it's seen as an imposition. It's seen as, we're the church of no. No, but see, we have to understand those laws according to the second sense of freedom. And then we see that the no is always in service of a much greater and more abiding yes. Does that make sense? And then when we speak the moral law, we speak the truths about the body, the truths about the family, the truths about complementarity. We're not seen as imposing some alien limitation on freedom. Rather, we're proposing what makes true freedom possible. See, that's the hinge upon which an awful lot of this turns, I think. And see, we've been cowed in many ways into prophetic silence. Who are you to tell me what to think? Who are you to tell me what to do or what to believe? And so we privatize. We silence ourselves. But part of the Imago Dei is to engage in prophetic speech precisely for the sake of the world. And see, friends, if we stop speaking, it won't be heard. That's the call, the prophetic call. You know what's interesting about that? The pink hair's distinction always helps me. It always opens up new things. I often say to people who will remark, when it comes to religion or morality, I mean, don't tell me what to do. That's really up to me. It's my individual choice. Would you accept that logic in regard to anything that you take seriously? And the answer is clearly no. Whether it's golf, just go swing any way you want. I mean, no one thinks that's right. Just you decide the way you want to play. No one thinks that's right. Play the violin. Well, just pick it up and you'll get it. No one will accept that logic of just play any way you want. When it comes to things we take seriously, we love the law. We reverence the law. We love those who are able to speak it to us clearly. See, and this is the ground for our prophetic confidence. The fact that the church does speak clearly and unambiguously about certain moral issues. Why the church uses the language of intrinsic evil, that some things are just wrong in themselves. There are objective moral values. We need to keep saying that to a world that's grown deaf to it. But here's the thing. The church's extravagant demand, and it is extravagant because we're not interested in spiritual mediocrity. Are we? I'm not. Jesus says, be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Church is not in the business of making spiritual mediocrities, settling for second, third, or fourth best. The church is in the business of making saints, last time I checked. And that's why we have this very bold, very clear prophetic speech. But that extravagant demand is coupled with an extravagant mercy. Now, Pope Francis, and all this wonderful speech about divine mercy. He's right, he's right, he's right. The church's extravagant demand, calling us to sainthood, is paired with, coupled with, an equally extravagant mercy. I remember years ago when I was in the seminary, we had a wonderful kind of crusty old Jesuit teaching us the confession practicum. And he said, if someone comes to you in confession and says, I've committed murder, your response should be, how many times? Now, you see, the point he was making was, that shouldn't lead you to some point where, oh my God, I'm leaving the confessional. No, the church's mercy is extravagant. Even if he had said, I've committed murder 20 times, is he sincerely repentant? Is he seeking the mercy of God? Then the church lavishes the divine mercy upon him. The extravagance of the demand is met by an extravagant mercy. See, here's the thing I feel, friends, really strongly about. Don't drive a wedge between the two things. And don't pretend it's a zero-sum game. You know what I mean? Well, if I'm really stressing demand, then I got to under-stress mercy. Or I'm really going to stress mercy, so that means I can't stress moral demand. No, that's repugnant to the logic of Christianity. G.K. Chesterton in Orthodoxy has a great reflection on this. We don't say Jesus is a little bit human, a little bit divine. We don't say, oh, the more you stress his divinity, the less you got to stress his humanity. Or vice versa, the less you stress. No, what we say is he's fully human and fully divine. And Chesterton said that sets the tone for the logic of Catholicism up and down the centuries. He said, we like red and we like white, and we have a healthy hatred of pink. I see what he meant by that is we don't like, little blendings and compromises. No, red and white, both flags flying. Moral demand, all the way. Mercy, all the way. That's the prophetic speech of the church. Good, thank you. Reread Chesterton's Orthodoxy on that. Again, he's just a source. It's now over 100 years old, that book, but a source of such wisdom. It has been for me anyway. Okay, finally, if you're keeping score now, we're coming to Kings, so we're coming to the end of the speech. We, sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, we members of the mystical body of Jesus, are meant to be kings. And again, what that means, people that tend the garden, make sure it's protected, kept integral. But more than that, people willing to go on campaign to bring the order and harmony of the garden now to the whole world. You know, a line from the Lord that I think I misunderstood for many, many years. When Jesus tells Peter, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. Somehow I always took that to mean hell is coming after us, but we're always going to be able to withstand it, right? That's how I always kind of heard that term. But you think about it for a second. In the ancient world, if you were attacking a city, you'd come up to its walls, you'd besiege the place, you'd try to break down the walls, right? And then you'd get in, you'd conquer the city. Well, now think of what Jesus said to Peter. The gates of hell will not prevail against you. We're the ones on the march. Hell has something to fear from us. Does that make sense? But see, it won't happen if, like David, at the time of year when we're meant to go on campaign, we stay home. It's not going to happen if we allow our religion to be privatized. And see, that's the etiquette of a modern polity, is we'll tolerate religion as long as it remains kind of your own little hobby. See, but hobbies don't threaten anybody. But authentic Christianity is a religion on the march. It's meant to be brought out to the world. Now, mind you, the minute we do this with aggression or violence or hatred, we are undermining ourselves, right? I mean, because the God we're announcing is the God of love. The Savior we're announcing is a crucified Savior. So, of course, we don't go out violently. And that's the mistake that, Christians, God knows, have made over the centuries, are making to the present day in some parts of the world. We go out, of course, in nonviolence, of course in love, of course in compassion. But by God, we go out. By God, we go out on march. Because we're kings, meant to Edenize the world. You know, Pontius Pilate was the first evangelist, wasn't he? Because Pilate, in John's delicious irony, and St. John loved to use irony in his gospel, Pilate nails over the cross, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, right? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And he puts it in Greek and Aramaic too, so no one will miss it. He thereby became the first announcer of the gospel. Because the good news is there's a new king. You know, I've said before, one of the watchwords of the time was Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar is the Lord. That's how you even greet someone in the ancient world, Kaiser Kyrios. Paul, who got this message in his bones, Paul kept saying, no, not Kaiser Kyrios, Jesus Kyrios, right? Jesus is Lord. Remember the beautiful Philippians hymn that ends with, so every tongue proclaim to the glory of God the Father, Jesus Christ is Lord. That's why Paul spent a lot of time in prison. Because they got it. They knew what he meant. They knew he was announcing a new king. And he wanted to bring everybody under the lordship of that king. You know, the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, the seer envisions the heavenly Jerusalem coming down. And there's the beautiful city with the streets of gold, the gates of pearl. But in that city, there's no temple. It's peculiar, isn't it? You think, well, heck, that's why Jerusalem was the holy city, because it had a temple in it. The point is, the city itself has become a temple. Every aspect of the life of the city, and think here of a great city like Philadelphia, a great city like Chicago, Los Angeles, or Paris, or Rome, the great cities that include entertainment and sports and commerce and business and various livelihoods. Think now of every aspect of the city ordered to God. That's what the visionary in the book of Revelation saw. He saw the city itself had become a temple. That's the goal of biblical revelation, because that's the goal of our kingly mission, is now to sanctify the world. You know, I got 9 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay. Can I offer just a little challenge really to everybody in this room? The great documents of Vatican II, now 50 years later, well worth returning to again and again. The call of the laity, the universal call to holiness. What is it? What is it? It's the rediscovery of the Imago Dei. What Vatican II envisioned for the laity, great Catholic lawyers and politicians and writers and business leaders and investors and parents and teachers going forth into the world so as to sanctify it. Okay? We all agree that's the Vatican II vision. We know about a month ago, I was on a TV program in Chicago, and the anchor person was pressing me on the crisis in the priesthood. And I said, yeah, there is, in many ways, and we know that, a crisis in the priesthood. But I said, to be honest with you, there's just as big a crisis in the laity. I said, 75% of Catholic lay people don't come to Mass. 75%. And we're doing well. That's in our country. We're doing pretty well. If you had told Henri de Lubac, Romano Guardini, Joseph Ratzinger, Hans-Urs von Balthasar, the great figures at Vatican II, if you had told them that in the year 2015, 75% of Catholics stay away from Mass, they would have seen their project as a failure. Vatican II wanted to revive the Mass, didn't it? It wanted to bring more people to the Mass, full, conscious, and active participation. Do you ever wonder why our society is becoming increasingly secularized? A lot of reasons. Might give you one of them. Because so many Catholics have stopped going to Mass. The source, thank you. The source and summit of the Christian life, and most of us, the vast majority of us, stay away from it. We wonder why the society is becoming spiritually lost. Because we, to a large extent, and I mean this as a challenge to all of us in this room, we, to a large extent, have lost our sense of mission, of how to sanctify the world. Just a couple things now as I close about the family more specifically. It's a fundamental truth of Catholic social teaching that the family is the basic cell of civil society. Here's what I want you to see. That is meant in much more than a numeric or sociological sense. That is meant in a deeply spiritual and theological sense. Here's what the church means, I think. The family is the place where the Imago Dei is burnished, where the Imago Dei is brought to life. The family is the place where we are taught to be priests, prophets, kings. Families that pray together, that go to Mass together, parents that bless their kids before they go to bed at night, families where a sense of mission among the children is cultivated and encouraged. That's a family that's learning right praise. And that family now can go out into the world to teach right praise. A family where basic moral truths are taught and above all lived is a family that's learning how to engage in prophetic speech, that now learns how to go out to the wider society and speak this important truth. Families where the virtues are cultivated. You know what I'm talking about here? The virtues of courage and of prudence, virtues of forgiveness, virtues of nonviolence. Where these virtues are being taught, that's a family which can now go out to teach the world those same virtues. A family where missions are encouraged, where parents know their most basic responsibility is to encourage the God-given mission of their kids, those are families that will now go out into the world and teach the world their missions. Does anyone find it puzzling? Thank you. We shouldn't find it puzzling that when the family breaks down, society breaks down right behind it. Right? It shouldn't puzzle us if the family is the basic building block of civil society. If the family is a place where right praise, right behavior, the virtues, mission aren't inculcated, then the society at large will be a place where those things don't happen. And so I would say, everybody, in conclusion, rediscover who we are meant to be. Not as a private privilege. The image of God is a mission. It's an adventure. It's a command. We carry, as it were, the image of the emperor, of the king. We're like emissaries of the great king. And we carry his image now out to the world. Do it confidently as priests, teaching right praise. Do it confidently as prophets, speaking truth. Do it confidently as kings, people on mission, people on the march. And God bless you all.